Fight fans, welcome to the PBC Podcast, brought to you by Premier Boxing Champions with your host, Kenneth Buhari and Michael Rosenthal.
Welcome to the PBC Podcast. I'm Kenneth Buhari.
And I am Michael Rosenthal, editor of USA Today's Boxing Junkie.
Thank you all for joining us for the final episode of 2020. Hope you guys have been enjoying the holiday season. I'm sure all of us can't wait for 2021 to arrive. I'm just praying for better days ahead. This is our year-end edition, so we're going to unveil our 2020 PBC Awards. We'll also take a look back at last weekend's PBC on Fox card, and in our toe-to-toe section, we'll share our top 3 moments of 2020. But first, the boxing world was hit with some sad news this week. The great Frankie Randall died on December 23rd at 59 years old. Randall had been battling Parkinson's and pugilistic dementia, one of the best 140-pounders of the modern era, a 3-time world champion, and someone who Floyd Mayweather credits as a person who truly helped him become the fighter he was. Mike, what are your memories of Frankie Randall?
Well, first, I was saddened to hear that news. I think his story is sort of the best and the worst of what boxing has to offer. I had just started covering boxing, actually just started covering, I was going to say started covering boxing regularly, but I really had just started covering boxing when he beat Julio Cesar Chavez in 1994, which is pretty much what he's known for. It was just a huge deal back then. Chavez wasn't unbeatable. He had recently been gifted that draw with Pernell Whitaker. I think everybody knows that Whitaker won that fight, but he was still unbeaten, and he was a formidable guy. Randall, meanwhile, was a good, rugged boxer puncher who was just kind of an all-around good fighter who was getting his first shot at a title at 32 years old, which is a story in itself. And then he not only became the first to beat Chavez, he won a split decision, he also became the first to put him down. It was shocking for us because we just never seen either one of those things happen. He lost the rematch, he won another title, lost it, and then was never the same after that. I think he went 3-13 in his final 16 fights. Yeah, he just fought too long, which, I just wonder whether that played a role in his condition. Later in life that you mentioned, he had dementia and Parkinson's, and he sort of just faded away, according to his son, who made the announcement of his death. Great story, Frankie Randall, but also a real sad story. Rest in peace, champ.
Yeah, definitely. Prayers to his family and to loved ones. 2020 has been quite a year, I think, for all of us. And with that, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next portion of the show. Speaking of 2020, we now have the 2020 PBC Awards. All right, guys, it's time for the PBC 2020 Year-End Awards, and we got a series of stuff we're going to go over here. I'm sure you're not going to all agree with our choices, so we'd love to get some feedback in the comment section on YouTube. And with that, we're going to start with our first category, the Emerging Star. This is the award for a young fighter we believe is on the verge of becoming a star, and the candidates this year are WBA interim world super featherweight champion Chris Colbert, welterweight prospect Eimantas Stanionis, and super bantamweight contender Stephen Fulton. Now, this was a tough one. We had some guys who just missed the cut, guys like Jesus Ramos and Mario Barrios. But Mike, why don't you go ahead and announce the winner and why?
And the winner is, drum roll. I'm not hearing a drum roll. Chris Colbert. As we said last week, I just think he has it all. The natural gifts, the ability, the swag, which, helps build a following. And while even he acknowledges that he's more of a hit and not be hit guy, he's not a power puncher. I think he's shown that he could hurt people. I think he's off the charts in terms of talent, as we've said in the past. He's already demonstrated that against pretty good opposition. He's not beating journeyman these days. Still, as everybody says, there are many levels to the sport. His mission now is to prove that he could continue to win in the same fashion as he continues to move up the ladder, and I suspect he's going to be able to do that.
Yeah, I agree with you. For me, it was close between Colbert and Stanionis. Stanionis did fight multiple times this year, but Primetime's performance against Jaime Arboleda, I mean, that seals the deal for him. He showed everything you want to see in a fighter that night. It was just a brilliant performance. I believe big year ahead of him coming up in 2021. I look forward to seeing what's next for him. All right, let's move on to the next category, comeback of the year. The candidates are heavyweight contender Robert Helenius, unified world welterweight champion Errol Spence Jr., and super bantamweight Victor Pasillas. Mike, who's the pick?
To me, this was fairly obvious. Errol Spence Jr. I think what Helenius did was surprising and impressive. He's actually a decent candidate for this. And Pasillas actually has an interesting story, having left boxing for so long, only to return. And, now he's successful again. Now, that said, Spence could have been killed. He could have been injured to a point where he couldn't fight again. We didn't know after the accident whether we'd ever see him in the ring again, which was kind of heart-wrenching given his talent. Remember the first photos of his cut-up face when he was in the hospital? So to bounce back from that, to battle back from whatever scars he had, physically and mentally, and do what he did against Danny Garcia was really special. I think I speak for everyone when I say I'm grateful things turned out the way they did for him.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think I'm with you as far as this being a no-brainer. I mean, nothing much to say here. We all remember how we felt in October 2019 when the news started to trickle in about the accident, and then to watch that video. There was so much concern about just his own well-being, let alone, I mean, boxing seemed so far out of the question when the accident first occurred. So, for him to work his way back and then take on Danny Garcia, not a tune-up, but one of the best welters in the world, and then to beat him decisively, I think he wins this award most years if this were up for it. Now, it's time for the upset of the year. A lot of candidates in this one, and we boiled it down to three. They are January 18, 2020, Jason Rosario knocking out Julian J. Rock Williams in his hometown of Philadelphia to take away the WBA and IBF 154-pound world titles. Second one, Robert Helenius, fourth round TKO over Adam Konaski. That was last March. Heavyweight action from Brooklyn's Barclays Center. What a night that was. And the final choice, last August, super middleweight Alfredo Angulo was the victim of a monster upset when the unheralded Vladimir Hernandez soundly defeated him via 10-round unanimous decision. And with that said, Mike, who's the pick?
The winner is Jason Rosario versus Julian Williams. The thing that makes this upset so special was Williams. I mean, we all know about his abilities, which are obvious, and he was coming off a special victory. Everyone was touting Jared Hurd as this physical beast who would be next to impossible to beat this guy, and then Williams just handled him. He won convincingly. Williams was suddenly, if you recall, he was suddenly a pound for pound discussions, if not on some lists. Enter Rosario, sort of an under the radar guy who we knew had ability, but not this kind of ability. He just overwhelmed Williams in one of the best performances of the year. I thought that was a huge upset. Of course, Rosario got his handed to him 8 months later, but that's boxing, ups and downs.
Yeah, I 100% agree regarding the winner, but it was close for me because when I think back, I didn't expect Robert Helenius to have any chance of beating Adam Konaski. I thought that was a foregone conclusion. But you just listed why, listed all the reasons why Rosario Williams was the upset of the year. Williams, he was becoming a top pound for pounder, as you mentioned. He had upset Jared Hurd. It was a brilliant performance. He's coming home to Philadelphia to defend his titles. And Rosario had been knocked out by Nathaniel Gallimore, who J-Rock clearly beat. So, it seemed like a no-brainer. Instead, we saw what we saw. Okay, now it's time for the Trainer of the Year award. And the candidates are the legendary Ronnie Shields, the man behind undefeated WBC middleweight champion Jermall Charlo, Derek James, who trains two unified champions, 147-pound King Errol Spence Jr., and the man at 154, Jermall Charlo, and Calvin Ford, the coach of DMV's finest, unbeaten two-division champion, Gervonta Tank Davis. Mike, and the winner is?
The winner is Derek James. As much as I respect Ronnie Shields and Calvin Ford, it's just another one that was fairly obvious to me, given what happened this year. Jermell was up against a really dangerous opponent, Rosario, who I thought had a decent chance of winning that fight. And he just dismantled the guy. He was clearly as prepared as he could possibly be, both physically and mentally. That has a lot to do with James, obviously. And James had a tricky situation with Spence, as we discussed. It seems to me that James guided him through some really difficult times very effectively. We could see in the ring that he was the Spence of old, but you have to stop and think what went into that. And then obviously James had a lot to do with it. Kudos to him. He deserves the recognition. And of course, there's a lot more to come from him.
Yeah, I agree with you. He truly does deserve it. I mean, I do think it was a no-brainer this year. Honestly, Derek James should sweep the awards everywhere. There are boxing awards for Trainer of the Year this year. You're talking about two high-level, hugely important fights in 2020, and his guys delivered both times in impressive fashion. Jermell Charlo stopping Jason Rosario, Errol Spence outpointing Danny Garcia. And those were two big moments in boxing, period. In 2020, James was in the corner of both winners. So to me, one of the easiest picks to be made this year. All right, it's time for the KO of the year. Our three options here are last March, Robert Helenius' fourth round TKO over Adam Konaski. Then in August, Joe George's violent knockout of Marcos Escudero with a single left uppercut. And speaking of left uppercuts, October 31st, Fight Night on Halloween, Gervonta Tank Davis flattening Leo Santa Cruz with the left uppercut in the sixth round. Mike, who's our pick?
Our pick is Gervonta Tank Davis. I think three things contributed to making this the KO of the year. One, just the ability of the fighters. Both guys just have so much respect. So I think that just raises the level of everything. Two, was the intensity of the fight leading up to the knockout. I mean, the action was pretty crazy, especially the moments right before the knockout. I thought Santa Cruz was having his best moments there at the end. And three, of course, the punch itself. I mean, Santa Cruz's lights were turned out just instantaneously. That was as brutal a punch as you're ever going to see. Honestly, I expected Davis to knock out Santa Cruz in good part because of what I saw as the natural size difference. Right. That didn't matter much in the end. I still fell off my chair when he landed that punch and ended the fight. That was just spectacular stuff.
It was truly special stuff. I mean, there's no question that Tank Davis is the clear winner of this category. It was so vicious, LeBron James tweeted about it. I mean, that was an incredible way to end a great fight. And now we move on to the performance of the year. This isn't the same as fight or fighter of the year, although this year, because most fighters fought only once, we struggled a bit with this category. But again, this is rather for fighters who put on great performances. And the nominees are Jermall Charlo's pound-for-pound performance versus Sergey Derevyanchenko, winning a unanimous decision. David Benavidez unloading an impressive offensive arsenal and stopping Alexis Anguilla in 10 rounds. And Chris Colbert's sterling 10th round TKO of Jaime Arboleda. Mike, who's your winner?
My winner, to me, was pretty clear, Jermall Charlo against Sergey Derevyanchenko. I think you can argue that Jermall had the toughest assignment among the elite guys that we're talking about, even tougher than his brother had and tougher than Gervonta Davis had. Derevyanchenko pretty clearly demonstrated against Daniel Jacobs and Triple G that he was on their level, which is saying something. This guy's no joke. And I thought Jermall beat him fairly handily, certainly more easily than Jacobs and Golovkin did. I thought it was a poised, efficient performance. He outboxed Derevyanchenko. I thought the most effective punch in the fight was Charlo's jab, and he weathered the inevitable storms that Derevyanchenko brings. It was simple as that for me. I think he made a strong statement. He proved he was as good at middleweight as he was at junior middleweight, and to me, that's a very big deal.
Yeah, definitely. And before I discuss the winner, I want to point out a few performances that nearly made the cut. Sebastian Fundura's highly impressive TKO win over Nathaniel Gallimore. Mario Barrios stopping Ryan Carl in the Battle of Texas. And, of course, Caleb Plant's whitewashing of Vincent Feigenbutz, where he showed off all of his skills. But what can you say about, Jermall Charlo? You mentioned it. Derevyanchenko was considered the toughest opponent of his career. He arguably beat Gennady Golovkin in 2019. In fact, I thought he did beat Golovkin, and so did a lot of other people. He fought Danny Jacobs tooth and nail in a very close fight that a lot of people thought he won as well. And Charlo gave him the worst beating of his career. Was it one-sided? No. Derevyanchenko had his moments, and he forced Charlo to dig deep, but Charlo did. He showed that shotgun jab, great right hands, left hooks, body punches, just overall an extremely impressive performance. We had trainer Robert Garcia on the podcast a month or two ago, and he said after watching that fight, he thought perhaps the guy that could beat Canelo Alvarez is Jermall Charlo. And you can see why, the skills, the athleticism, the determination. It'll be interesting to see how he looks if and when he does go up to 168. And with that, we're down to two more categories, the two big ones. Next on our list, Fight of the Year. Here are the candidates. Adam Konaski versus Robert Helenius, Jermall Charlo versus Sergey Derenchenko, Gervonta Tank Davis versus Leo Santa Cruz. And Mike, the Academy goes to
Gervonta Davis versus Leo Santa Cruz. These were all really good fights. I just really liked the way that this fight played out. I thought Santa Cruz would eventually get stopped, but the road to that eventuality was just as thrilling as could be, at least from my perspective. Leo was Leo in the end, just a warrior. I remember watching him going after Davis as that fight progressed, thinking, holy crap, this is really wild, really fun to watch, but it's also really, really dangerous. I actually thought, and as I mentioned before, I actually thought Leo had some of his best moments in the sixth round, and then just wham. Davis lands as good an uppercut as you're ever going to see in the fights over in an instant. I just thought the fight had it all. It had the big names, the magnitude that makes for great fights, the build-up, the back-and-forth action, the bravery on Santa Cruz's part, which was a big element of this, and then the dramatic ending. This was really a coming-of-age performance for Davis, I think. It was also just incredibly entertaining, which to me is the most important element of a fight of the year.
Yeah. And, I'm reminded of what Showtime Sports president Steven Espinoza said when we had him on the podcast a few weeks ago about how boxing has been greatly affected by the lack of a crowd. And Davis Santa Cruz had a crowd. It had a loud one, and it was part of what made it such a great fight, is you could feel it. I mean, it was excellent action in the ring, great back and forth. Santa Cruz brought the heat, but Tank was simply on another level that night, and that KO ending, what a thrill. I mean, it was a talk of social media for days, and I'm not just talking about among boxing fans. Yeah, I think everyone is going to be tuning in to see Tank the next time he fights. All right, it's time for our final category, the PBC 2020 Fight of the Year. Here are the candidates in alphabetical order. Jermall Charlo, Gervonta Davis, Errol Spence Jr. Mike, the winner is?
The winner is the slightly younger of the Charlo brothers, Jermall Charlo. This was tough. I mean, we described the performances of Jermall Charlo and Gervonta Davis, which were, pretty spectacular. Right. I just personally thought, and you agreed, that Jermall's was just a little bit better. I look at this in a similar way to the Jermall Charlo-Derenchenko fight. Rosario was coming off that impressive performance against Williams, in which he just looked like a monster. I really thought this was a dangerous fight for Jermall, one he could lose, one he could even get knocked out. I thought that was a possibility. I definitely thought it was going to be a competitive fight, and it really wasn't. Charlo was coming off his, maybe people forget, Charlo was coming off his own impressive victory, his knockout of Tony Harrison in their rematch. Yeah. And he just continued to roll. He overwhelmed Rosario in the end. He put him down 3 times and stopped him. I picked Charlo to win, but not dominate like that. I just didn't see that coming, not after Rosario's performance against Williams. The one thing that that's one thing that made Charlo's performance so special. I think he proved beyond doubt in the Harrison fight and then against Rosario that he's one of the best pound-for-pound fighters in the world. I believe strongly that he's deserving of this recognition.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with you. I mean, look, Rosario knocking out J-Rock was one thing. I think he showed even against Charlo that he, despite the loss, that he was formidable, the way he backed Charlo up, the way he was working the body. There were some hairy moments in there, but Jermall Charlo is just on fire right now. It was a real mature performance from him. We've seen him press too hard for the knockout, against guys like Austin Trout, for instance, but here he just worked the jab, threw his combinations, wisely picked his moments to explode. He stuck to the plan. And even when he dropped Rosario at the end of the 6th, he didn't come out in the 7th going crazy and search for the KO. He just went back to his plan. He worked the jab, and eventually it paid off with that wild, body shot jab to the solar plexus. I mean, you said it. Jamel Charlo's a top pound for pounder, in my opinion. The guy has been cleaning out 154 for a while now. He's creating quite the legacy for himself, a truly special fighter. Again, guys, we'd love to get your take on the winners, so let us know what you think. And now it's time for the week in review. Last Saturday, Fox PBC Fight Night returned with the final card of 2020, a triple header, and in the main event, WBA interim world super middleweight champion David Morrell Jr. took on Mike Gavronski. Morrell, a touted amateur, fighting for only the fourth time as a pro. He is being moved super quickly. Typically, a fighter like Gavronski would be a major step up in class for someone fighting in just their fourth pro bout, but that was not the case with Morrell. In fact, it was a mismatch in Morrell's favor. He dropped Gavronski in the first, finished him off in the third round. Very dominant performance, another dominant performance, I should say. Mike, he didn't get a lot of rounds in, but what are your thoughts on Morrell?
Well, in this fight, I thought he looked really good, but it's you sort of alluded to this. It's difficult to gauge a performance when the winner is that much better than his opponent, and that's how things turned out. Morrell basically just landed at will. Gavronski tried, he had guts, but he just didn't have the tools to handle a guy with that kind of pedigree. Anyway, I like the accuracy of Morrell's punches. I like the variety. Gavronski was getting hit just everywhere from all sorts of angles. And I like the fact that everything he did was efficient. He wasn't wild or anything like that. He looks composed in there. So the guy's upside is so high that you can't even see it. And one more cool thing. I had a chance to talk to Morrell for a story a few days before the fight. Super, super nice guy. I think you could actually see that after the fight, the way he showed Gavronski some compassion. I really like to see that. He's the kind of guy. The reason I say that is he's the kind of guy you want to root for.
Yeah, he seems wise beyond his years, and it shows in the ring. He's composed, a lot of tools to work with there. Still a little bit raw in spurts from what we saw in his last fight. Really didn't see that in this fight, so hard to gauge where the improvement is. Who would you like to see him face next?
Well, he wouldn't tell me when he thinks he might fight for a title. He's leaving that up to his team. But he's obviously not that far off. He already won the interim title, as you mentioned. Is he ready for Canelo Alvarez? Of course not. And I think he knows that. He and his team know that. For now, only 4 fights into his pro career, I would target someone better than Gavronski. Then maybe that's stating the obvious, but not like a top 5 guy or anything like that. Just not yet. I could see him against a guy like, this is maybe a little ironic, Avni Yildirim, even though he is a top 5 guy. I'm not sure if he really deserves to be. Or like a John Ryder, maybe even a Caleb Truax, maybe somebody at that level. We'll see how Truax does against Caleb Plant, but I'm picking Plant to win that. Anyway, that level guy, I could see him fighting. I definitely wouldn't rush him. He's only 22. I think he has, as you mentioned, he's shown some signs of needing to evolve, needing to improve. But the more experience he gets, the better he's going to be when he does get his chance.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, you put him in with somebody durable, let him get some more rounds in. Not necessarily top 5 guy, not necessarily top 10 guy, but let him get some more rounds in and just continue to work at his craft, and you may have something here. Now, in the co-feature, one-time terror, James Kirkland, the Mandingo Warrior, made his return to television at 36, trying to recapture past glory, but it wasn't to be. Kirkland was dropped 3 times by Juan Macias Montiel, losing by first round KO. Mike, I think it's safe to say Kirkland is nowhere near what he once was, and probably a lot closer to retirement than maybe he'd like to admit.
He's had a good career. He was a popular attraction, a fun guy to watch. And from talking to him, I kind of gather that he's business minded. I think he's done some real estate. That kind of thing. So he has other ways that he can make a living in his new hometown of San Antonio.
Now, what about Montiel? I mean, he looked good. I think he's earned himself another nice payday at 160. What are your thoughts on him?
Well, this is almost like the Morrell Gavronski situation. It's sort of difficult to gauge what Montiel has because of the opponent. That says, it looks to me like he does have something. He definitely has power. He's knocked out every single guy that he's beaten. Now he's got 4 losses, but every win is by knockout. He really and he looked like he knew what he was doing in there. To me, his punches were precise. He was real confident and poised in there. I'd like to see him again against a better opponent.
Yeah, so would I, and hopefully we do get to see him again. I think he's earned that that shot. Now, in the televised opener, undefeated welterweight prospect Jesus Ramos, I say welterweight, but he actually moved on to junior welterweight for this fight. He continues to look fantastic, bottom line, no matter what division he's fighting in. Ramos clinically beat down Naeem Nelson until Nelson's corner waved it off after the fourth round. Mike, what's your take on Ramos?
I thought that was a superb performance, given that he's only 19 years old. I thought he just ripped apart what was supposed to be a step-up opponent in Naeem Nelson. I think Nelson felt his power early in the fight and sort of immediately went into a defensive mode, which really didn't help him in the end. Ramos still managed to beat the you-know-what out of him. He put him down twice with shots to the head, which were scary, but I was really impressed with his body work. That was just really scary. That just slowly broke down Nelson. Ramos definitely doesn't fight like a teenager. He's got poise. He's got ability. His ability is plain to see. He has power, obviously. What's not to like about this guy? I think he's really got something going on. I think this guy's going to be a good fighter.
Yeah, it's scary that he's only 19. What about him? I mean, what do you do with him next? It's clear he's beyond this level. Who would you like to see him face after this?
Well, the weird thing is that Nelson, I think Nelson was supposed to be like a competent guy who's supposed to test him a little. So I'm not sure. Again, he's a teenager. So but I think he could beat all but a handful of guys like right now. I just wouldn't go there yet. Maybe he faces a top 20 guy next.
Yeah.
A top 15 guy, maybe something like that. You could tell by, podcast after podcast, I sort of say, let's not rush things. So I'm a little bit conservative. I don't want to take unnecessary chances, unless you never have to. I just don't think it's smart to take unnecessary chances. Just, it's better to wait one fight too long than to push him too hard, make one fight early, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, exactly. And the kid's 19? I mean,
Yeah, he's young. There's no reason to rush him. That said, if he fights for a major title in 2022, I won't be surprised.
Yeah, me neither. You can tell the kid has the goods. I expect him to see him in some good fights in 2021. Now, it should be noted that Mike and I finished tied in the prediction league, which is pretty hard to do. Both of us 37, 6-1 to close it out. Hopefully, the new year brings some new results for us.
That's a good winning percentage that we had. I think I've said that before, but I didn't figure out what it was. It's like 90% or something like that. It's not bad.
Yeah, it is. I think we, it could have been even better. I feel like
yours should have been better because of that.
Yes,
the last one.
Let's not talk about it. I've moved on. But we'll see what happens next year. Revenge will be mine next year. It's 2 years in a row now. I think we finished tied. So again, 2021, new year, new us. And new results, hopefully. All right, it's time for Mike and I to go toe-to-toe. To close out the year, we're going to share our 3 most memorable moments of 2020, boxing anyway. And Mike, I'll kick this off with number 3, which was heading to Nashville, Tennessee for Caleb Plant's homecoming against mandatory challenger Vincent Feigenbutz. And let me explain why. One, Nashville is just an incredible city. I mean, the vibe, the music, the food. We had a lot of great dinners, great breakfast, just walking around and touring the city. Truly one of the best trips to a fight that I've been to. And then the fight atmosphere. I mean, the city came out for Caleb Plant. It was jam-packed in there. I was not expecting that big a crowd. It was packed at the Bridgestone Arena. And then Plant's performance, stopping Feigenbutz the way he did with flair. I mean, the hometown crowd just ate it up. So good to see boxing in a city that isn't necessarily known for that. And I think Plant's opened up a market there. Nearly 2 million people watched him on Fox that night. So it was kind of a star-making performance. You add that to all the other things I experienced. And in that trip to Nashville, it's definitely one of my most memorable moments of 2020.
That's fun stuff. You made me realize something that when I look back on my career, I think the things that maybe I remember the most are the trips, the trips you made for various fights. For example, I was in Memphis for Tyson and Lewis, which was one of the unforgettable trips. But I was in Mexico City for Chavez and Haugen. I mean, there's a bunch of great trips, but that's sort of what it's about for boxing writers. It's a big part of what it's about, is these amazing trips. So that's really fun.
Yeah. What about you? What's your number 3?
Well, I'm gonna go a little somber here, so we can get this out of the way. I'm gonna start with COVID-19 Unfortunately, 2020 is going to be remembered by everyone in the world as the year of the virus. That includes boxing and sports in general, which were turned upside down by this thing, by the restrictions. Boxing shut down for 4 or 5 months, solid. A lot of fights didn't happen because of that, and not many of the biggest stars fought more than once, as we mentioned. But there's on the positive side, I was impressed with the way the sport responded, creating bubbles to stage fights, the willingness to fight without spectators, which was something, and accepting the fact, I guess, in a lot of cases that there just wasn't as much money to be made under these circumstances. I think the powers that be did a pretty good job. Bottom line, though, let's just hope. Couldn't be more obvious. Let's just hope we never have to deal with anything like this again.
Yeah, I hope not. Although it seems like we'll probably have to, at least for the first part of 2021, unfortunately. But it's interesting you mentioned that, because that actually leads into my second choice. My number 2 is Adam Konaski's stunning upset TKO loss to Robert Helenius, and a few reasons for that. One, it's always nice to be in Brooklyn. Love the Barclays. I love the New York boxing crowd. As I'm part of it, but knowledgeable fight fans in general. And I mean, the entire population of people of Polish descent in New York were at the Barclays to support Konaski that night. And it was a war for 3+ rounds until that fourth, when Helenius dropped a hammer on Konaski and completely silenced that crowd. I mean, they were stunned. It was like a funeral in there, but they were classy. You know, they applauded Helenius for his efforts afterwards, and then they cheered Konaski on as he was heading to the locker room, encouraging him and so forth. But it was a wild, shocking night. But it was also the final fight before everything got shut down. Because of COVID. It was a strange time, you know. I remember, you know, no one wanted to do handshakes or fist bumps. We didn't quite know what was going on. We had no clue what lay ahead of us. And sadly, a lot of folks that I laughed and joked with that night, you know, folks that I was accustomed to spending a lot of time with, I haven't seen since. Right. So, you know, definitely a night I won't forget.
That was a big upset. It really was. I mean, Konatsky was really a fast rising guy. You know, you thought that the guy was going to be in a title shot soon. It could still happen, but and the Helenius story is a good story. It's always nice to see a guy who's been, especially a veteran guy, who's kind of been written off, sort of comes up with this big victory. So that was pretty cool. Now, one thing I remember also from that fight is, and I actually watched it again recently. Was it Konatsky's wife or girlfriend who was watching at ringside?
I believe it was I don't remember whether it was girlfriend or wife, but I know.
His partner, I guess the woman in his life is, and I'm watching her watch the fight, which is always a fascinating thing to watch. And it appears that he's in big trouble and she's freaking out. And it reminds me of all the wives who had to sit and watch, or mothers, I guess, also, and family members have to watch what their fighters, what their family members have to go through. You know, I'm really digressing, but I go back to Gabe Ruelas. I was real close with Gabe and Rafael Ruelas, and I got close to Gabe's wife, Leslie, and she couldn't watch the fight. She didn't watch him fight. She would sit in a hotel room and wait for a phone call when the fight is over. So anyway, she reminded me that the families also play a role in what these guys do, and in that fight, it was up front and center.
Yeah, it's rough to watch. You know, I can, as a fan, sometimes it's hard for me to watch these fights, which will actually lead to my number 1. But what is your number 2?
Well, my number 2 is stuff that we've already discussed this earlier, but this Errol Spence's return to boxing. Yeah. First, there was the accident. I remember when I heard the news, my heart just sunk. I got that feeling of, oh no, not Errol Spence, because I didn't know the extent of his injuries. I was pretty shaken up, and I know a lot of people were. You alluded to this earlier. Then it turns out that he'll live. Then we learned that his injuries, you know, weren't as serious as they could have been. Then we hear he's back in the gym. Then they make the fight with Garcia. Then he turns in a performance that makes it seem like as if the accident never happened at all. Right. It was a hell of a journey for him, but also for people who follow him. I think it changed him for the better as a person. How could it not? I think he's a more grateful person, and I think I could speak for everyone when I say we're grateful that we still have Errol Spence.
Yeah, for sure. That's another night I won't forget. I remember being so nervous about that fight, and just for his health and so forth, and so many concerns, and for him to come out. And you made a great point. I think it was either last week or 2 weeks ago on the podcast when you were like, you know, if he hadn't had an accident and at all, and you looked at his performance, would you have thought that there was anything off or different about him? No. He was facing a tough Danny Garcia, and he did his thing. He won fairly decisively. So, I mean, just an amazing story. The comeback of Errol Spence. Of course, we look forward to seeing him back in the ring again soon. And now we go to number 1. And for me, it was the rematch between Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury. What an atmosphere. It was a wild fight week. Celebrities everywhere. I remember taking the escalator with Fabulous, pretty popular rapper. I mean, you ran into them everywhere. It was just that wild. And then the fight itself. I mean, it was predominantly pro-Fury crowd at the MGM. I was a big Deontay fan, obviously. And my boy, my dear friend Kojo from Raps on TV, a boxing podcast show in the UK, he had flown down from London. He was in the media back room where they had TVs to watch the fight. Obviously, I was, wherever PBC was. And, when Fury dropped Wilder in the 3rd round, I believe it was, I remember I thought of him. I grabbed my briefcase and raced out of the arena, sped over to him in that room where he was watching, and sat and watched it with him. I remember talking to him. He and I had gone over so many different scenarios, and we thought, a Fury stoppage was possible. Certainly wasn't out of the question, but it was still stunning to see it. So anyway, after the fight, he and I spent a good amount of time at the bars in the MGM, met a lot of good folk who had traveled from the UK. It was a festive occasion for them, obviously a downer for Deontay. But overall, it's just one of those moments in boxing that is going to go down in history. And although I didn't like the outcome, I was glad to witness it and to be a part of it.
Yeah, nothing. I sort of reinforce the notion that nothing compares to the drama of a big heavyweight fight. Just nothing, really. I mean, I think you can argue that just in sports, nothing is, maybe the Super Bowl, but a really, really big, good heavyweight fight is something very special. And this one was just thick with drama. They had the first fight, which ended in a controversial draw. The buildup for the second fight was just immense, as you mentioned. And what we saw in the ring was just unforgettable. Remember, Fury had said he was going to knock out Wilder. But
right.
A lot of people, including me, thought, he's just talking, that he would use his boxing skills like he did in the first fight. Nope. True to his word, Fury, who was, if you recall, was a lot heavier than he was in the first fight, just went after Wilder. He put him down twice, and he stopped him in 7 rounds. And he established himself as the man at heavyweight in the process, which is a huge deal, obviously. It just doesn't get more dramatic than that. And I thought Wilder's curious post-fight comments added to the story.
Oh, it sure did.
It added to a story that just keeps on giving. It's still giving, and I think that sort of speaks to the magnitude of that fight. Just a huge fight, and it was cool to be a part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. Come to think of it, sort of builds it up for a third fight. I know, speaking of a third fight, I think Wilder deserves a third fight. Will the outcome be the same? Yeah, maybe, but look, Wilder granted the man a rematch when a lot of folks didn't think Wilder won the first fight. He was willing to give him an immediate rematch. Then Fury pulled out of that rematch and made Deontay wait another year. So I think it's the right thing to do to give Wilder another shot. Now, that said, I understand why fans want to see an undisputed heavyweight champion, because I do too, So my hope is that we see both in 2021, that Wilder get his shot and we get an undisputed champ. Whatever order that happens in is fine by me, but I'd like to see that happen.
I'm with you.
In 2021. It's been so great to see the revival of the heavyweight division and the different characters and so forth. I'm truly excited. And with that, that'll be all for today's show and for the PBC podcast in 2020. We want to thank you all for tuning in and to listening to us talk boxing every week. We anticipate some great matchups in 2021 and some great guests for the PBC podcast. So with that, we hope you all enjoy the holidays, New Year, stay safe, and be sure to tune in next week for more boxing talk right here on the PBC podcast.